Well,
until they change their minds.
On the first Human League album, for that reason, because we hated that rock thing, you know, quite like Queen, but it was like we put no guitars, you know.
Yeah.
So it was like a reaction against that as well. It just felt terribly old-fashioned. Guitars, you know, it's that arrogance of youth. You think, oh, guitars, come on, they're so last week, you know. Let's just forget it's all. The future is all electronic, pure electronic, and we're never going to use anything other than electronics. That's it.
Yeah.
It was actually a manifesto that we had up on the wall.
Written down. Right. What was on that manifesto in detail?
It just said that everything apart from the human voice was going to be electronic that we ever created, and we weren't. And we also had a list of words we weren't allowed to use in the lyrics,
such as
like love.
Love. Right.
Yeah. And and you know, just general bland words that we used in pop songs. We had a list of about 8 or 9.
Do you feel like you got round for not using love?
No, it's quite interesting because we wrote a lot of songs about love, but we had to take a different perspective.
It's interesting. I actually felt dirty when I used love on a track on our third album. There's a cliche and I can't get around it. In the same way that we refused to let our drummer use cymbals for the first 3 albums. There was this certain things were just too cliched and stereotyped. They were not to be allowed in.
Exactly. It felt like an art manifesto,
right?
In a brief sense, yeah. Because also, I mean, it was all wrapped up. I mean, you can probably vouch for this, Daniel. It was like all wrapped up with how you presented yourself visually as well.
In the early radiophonic workshop stuff, Delia Derbyshire talked about that a lot of their work dealt with the far past, the far future, or in the mind. And there was definitely a sense that for the radiophonic workshop and their experiments with synthesis and tape machines was about. It was a social thing. Like the music department of the BBC were not interested about the radiophonic workshop, were quite against it and would try to cut funding for it. But it was the BBC drama department that gave them their work. Yeah. And so it's this tying into this idea of a sort of wider social, you know, like their experiments with synthesis were derived from providing the soundtrack to ideas of the future and sci-fi, or this imaginary space race or technologies out in the sense of the otherness.
And when we first went to do our first John Peel session in '78, it was the first place we went to at Maida Vale. Was the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. It was like a pilgrimage. It was like going to Mecca for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember doing that as well, going down the
It was like I wasn't interested in anything else. I'm not bothered about the big orchestral stages, nothing. It was the BBC Radiophonic Workshop.
In a way, DJs have become electronic producers and electronic music has become DJing. The two have sort of become intertwined, not entirely but largely. I think, you know, they're really, really closely linked, whereas when the Normals record came out, the Human League, I mean, a lot of people from my generation, I'd say, were kind of their kind of entry level was buying Human League records. So there was a fascination with the future, and there's an extraordinary amount of DJs and producers I know are obsessed with Star Wars as well. Because we grew up in that generation of kind of Star Wars and Human League records, Normal records, that kind of new romantic explosion of kind of electro pop, and then hip hop after it. I mean, I went through all of those phases. You know, I remember seeing Human League live at the Marquee with Spiz Energy supporting them, and you know,
the hottest gig on earth ever. It's like the centre of the sun.
So I went through all of those, but I think DJ culture now has kind of become inextricably intertwined with electronic music. That doesn't mean to say that all DJs only play electronic records, or that all electronic musicians are making music that DJs play, but I do think that it's difficult to kind of extract the two of them.
Isn't it that transmission of moving and grooving and making people dance and physically bringing people into contact with it, as opposed to it being, you know, an emotional connection? Well, isn't that the thing that really stepped that up? And obviously from a point of view of before, at certain eras, if you were not into funk or soul or disco, you weren't allowed to dance, or you didn't really feel you were confident enough to dance. But when certain records broke through that, you felt that you could naturally do it.
First of all, every A&R man in America had, and probably mostly still have, some guitar in there, like their own guitar standing in their office. That was just like, and they would play. This is how you should do it. Like, and they've probably now got little synth in the corner. That's you. But no, I remember when Depeche. There was a pocket of there was like 15 stations in America called alternative radio stations, which was K-Rock, WDRE. I can't remember all of them, and they played new British music in general. So they play New Order, they play The Cure, they play Echo and the Bunnymen, they play Depeche, they play Orchestra Blues, they play the Human League. So it wasn't specific electronic music. Or what it was, I think, was kind of outsider music, and I think it was the kids who were at the back of the class who weren't really part of the gang.
Yeah.
And
the intellectuals and the faggots.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the ones who maybe had slightly weird makeup if they were girls or boys, whatever, and maybe wore a bit more black.
Proto-goths.
Whatever they were slightly outsiders. And I think in those pockets of I mean, when Depeche first went over, they played in New York at the Ritz Club, and all the kids there were not from New York,
right?
Because there wasn't a station in New York, but they all came from New Jersey because there was a station in New Jersey. People then said there's no way Depeche can ever get out of the clubs because they don't have a drummer, and and it wasn't regarded as real music, and it's kind of gay disco kind of thing or whatever. But they did within a few years. They were playing stadiums in America without a drummer.
They toured. What was the tipping point? How did they go from one point?
Well, I don't know. I remember what happened was what they. I don't know what caused the tipping point. But I remember it quite clearly because they were booked to play a club in LA, I can't remember what it's called now, like a 1,000-seater club in LA. Right. That sold out within a minute or something. They then booked a 3,000-seater, that sold out in a minute. And they ended up playing Irvine Meadows, which is a 15,000-seater, and that sold out in a minute. And I can't honestly, we didn't have a hit on the radio at that point. It wasn't, apart from these stations, it wasn't like all of a sudden we had a top 40 hit.
Yeah.
I think it was just, who knows? And then they had the riots outside the warehouse in LA because they did a signing and there was like 30,000 people outside.
Which album? Which album?
That was that album. The kind of the riot album was Music for the Masses.
The aptly titled.